it wasn't my job to.
Why should
but it should make guys like me uncomfortable. That's what should happen. That's what I'm saying.
What used to be
Yeah, you should.
I know, I'm finding it hard not to. I've had to write down a number of things, but
So we're just going to answer one question, deal with one question through discussion.
Yep.
And the one question is,
how do we deal with people who refuse to change or in power, who are racist?
Call it out. You know, the Fairfield example, I think, was a good one. That was one of the proudest moments of the forum, I think, when we said that's not true.
Yeah.
Evidence is your best defence. You know, point to what's happening, because a lot of narratives will get perpetuated politically because they suit politics. The narratives around gender, around marriage, that, for example, were perpetuated about Western Sydney not being accepting of diverse viewpoints, you know, were disproven in many parts of Western Sydney. Same goes for the notion that the major parties, one in particular, narrowcast to parts of Western Sydney on issues of race and on issues of migration, in the narrative around refugees and migrants. Different targeted messaging, you know, to Western Sydney. Western Sydney is highly targeted because of its electoral marginality. State and federal elections are incredible things. You know, we've got one coming up at the state level in March next year, of course. But there are also moments where some of the worst aspects of political leadership are brought to bear because the pollsters say, push this community on this issue. They're getting a lot of housing resettlement. They're getting a lot of immigration. Push them on it. And unfortunately, the push is almost inevitably negative. And I think it's up to the forum to say, you're wrong. The evidence says that this community is incredibly generous, incredibly harmonious. Or if it isn't, it isn't. And address it. But don't address it through the old tropes of racism. I think that's the thing. It's truth to power, Keith. It's saying to these guys, you're not going to get away with this crap. Because it's crap. And I think the forum probably needs, we always talk about this, to be a bit more activist. I think in the 5 years ahead we might see a situation where we get out and we disagree with some stuff in the public narrative. That's hard when you're an organisation that depends very significantly on government funding. But I'd rather reject the funding than live with something that perpetuates, you know, those stereotypes. But we've got to be cautious against that because it's always going to be a political battleground. And they narrowcast because pollsters unscrupulously tell them that it works. And they listen to them, you know, unfortunately. We've got to stand up.
I think when we come across that, which is in the macros, what you're talking about, Andy, about, you know, this election or pollsters, there's also when we hear someone else, and we come across the one.
Every day.
Every day kind of stuff. And my mind goes back to when we did the course, and the presenter was talking about sometimes you have to weigh it up, but we do need to be ready to speak. And that what struck me about that is we have to actually be ready beforehand to be thinking through what is our response, because if otherwise something's said and we kind of, you know, we go a minute down the road and we think, actually, that wasn't right, but it's almost too late. And so it's in the moment. But responding in the moment is where, in fact, we've thought ahead and thought, if those sorts of things are said or that's action is done, this is how we're likely to respond, or you know, because we've actually thought, actually that kind of statement is not right, and then the other way is the other thing. I'm going back to the training that we did was, but it needs to be done in a respectful way, because there's nothing achieved in starting a big fight, because all that does is ends up with a person backing themselves in a corner from which they will never come out of. So it's finding that, and sometimes it might be that we have to think through maybe now is not the time, or maybe now is the time, or maybe now is the time to say something, but to actually have a follow-up conversation. So, and I think the relationships is key to how do we deal with that, where we come across someone who is clearly, powerfully racist, how do we deal with that? And I also wonder about taking up the idea of relationship is, what's their story? How did they? What's behind their story? How did they come to be who they are? And having open-ended questions enables someone to tell their story, which then might lead to how my story might connect with their story, and how we can have a conversation around how, in fact, there might be another way to interpret an experience, or another way to actually engage and include people.
Something the training really honed in on was that you're either racist or you're anti-racist. There's not a middle ground. You're either one or the other. Your behaviours are either supporting that or supporting this. So I think from my experiences, I'm finding that transparency and accountability is key. Everybody has accountability. So we need to make sure that when we are having conversations, how do we lean into those conversations? What kind of environment are we creating? Is there a sense of belonging? Is it inclusive, just in the language that we're using, in the spaces that we're sitting in? And again, I go back to, I keep saying to the left, like Beyonce, but I always think about like making sure we understand why First Nations people do what they do. When they welcome you into country and they conduct a smoking ceremony, they're bringing you into their spaces. They're saying, we're going to take care of you. This is what you need. You make sure you listen because we don't want you to be at risk.
Yeah.
You know, the caretaking is just next level amazing. And I think that when we are coming across individuals like that, I think you're completely right. It's about what is your story. You know, many times, you know, I have family members, you know, like, I'm Australian. I'm like, okay, what kind of heritage do you have? And they're like, I'm Scottish. I'm like, do you know how to speak your language? And they're like, no, that's English. I'm like, is it? I would like to Google that and get some more information. And then when we have a conversation about, you know, what do you mean I don't know my language? I'm like, I don't know. let's talk about that. Having people be given opportunities, because it's not like you're right or you're wrong. Because you're right, that just creates more conflict. But to say, what is your story? You know, what layers of complexities are there? Like, I'm a Turk, and the layers of occupation that has happened in my ancestry, we're talking about 7 different empires, let alone just the British Empire. My stories, my songs, my knowledge of country has been stripped, torn away, burnt, like to a point where it got retold and reframed and reordered. And now it's causing conflict with my neighbours, you know, people who we used to share figs with, olives with. It's in conflict.
Yeah.
And that was created by empires, people of privilege, and people of power. So I myself have to unlearn and understand my own story and my own identity to respect and listen to yours actively. And elders have taught me that. When they speak their Aboriginal language, whichever parts of Australia I'm on, it gives me goosebumps. And I don't understand a word they're saying. But I know they're saying, you're being welcomed into this space because I feel it. My heart feels it. And I think that we need to go back, and especially for people of colour like myself, the more I'm connected to my own identity, my own language, my own ancestry, the more I can respect aunt and uncles. I listen on a much deeper level, and that's what we do. We lean into, let's go slowly. Sometimes it might be painful to feel your white privilege. You might feel uncomfortable. You know, I'm not a racist, and not knowing that you saying that is not a good thing to start with.
Yeah.
The fact that you say I'm not racist. So I think that these complexities can only be resolved when we start talking about it and sharing it. I think that's the beauty of this journey. It's never right or wrong. It's an opportunity to redefine our country, to make sure that respect and a sense of belonging is always at the centre of this. Thank you for that.
Well said.
I know I'm not on the board, but I wonder if it's okay if I offer an observation. I just, like, I've been thinking while you were all talking about my understanding at the beginning. I'm at the beginning of my understanding of the difference between anti-racism and inclusion, or reconciliation and reparation. Like, I'm right at the beginning of that journey of understanding. But when I reflect on that question about 5 years' time, I think what I would like to see for the forum is that anti-racism is actually embedded in our strategy. It's not that we're waiting for a moment to decide whether we should have a voice or not. It's actually that we're looking at every structure in our society and every policy and every program and every piece of funding that comes through and critiquing it in that lens. Because the way that non-Anglo cultures in Australia, non-white people are criminalised, those things will be so subtle and so quiet, and it will be too late if we wait for a moment to have a voice. I think we have to build the platform to have a voice in those moments, build the credibility to have that voice, and it needs to be much deeper than that. And I just think, you know, how do we get to that point? What would it take for our board to give us permission? What does it take for us as a leadership team to give us permission to do work that's actually quite dangerous in the context of funding and needing to support an organisation to flourish? So I think it really heartened me to hear Andy say that he wants us to be more activist. I wonder what that looks like and how we balance that.
I always think doing the right thing is doing the right thing, and doing the right thing is always costly. But I think doing the right thing is doing the right thing, and I think we always need to do that. And I think when we start hedging, or because the issue is we've got a certain set of values, and when we start trying to do something that doesn't align with our values, I think we're in serious trouble. So if our values are to call things out, or to respect, or to do those kinds of things, then that's who we are, that's what we do. If that means that challenges funding bodies and funding streams, then either we change our values, or we say that funding stream is not the funding stream we want. And I think we have to say, well, this is who we believe we are to be. We've worked out this strategic direction. We've worked out, here's our vision statement, here are our values. We adhere to those values, which includes the things you've just mentioned embedded within that. And so that leads to the kind of behaviours that express the values. And I think that's where we go. So if a funding body then says, well, if you're going to be like that, we're not going to give you the money, well, that's when we know it's our values or not. Because if they're not our values or not ours, then we'll just say, well, we'll take the money. But if these are our values, we'll say, well, thank you very much, but this is who we are, and we'll figure out how we're going to be an organisation going forward.
That's it.
I think that's what we have to do.
And we rip it up. That's what we did with Andy gambling. And I know it's a different structural issue, but we say, look, we're not going to take those funds. We're not going to participate. We're not going to prop this stuff up. I think we have the same attitude.
Heather, I hear you. I like the notion of a racial equity index assessment tool, so that way there's a lens. So like you said, when you pick up a project or you've created a policy or program, you kind of put the lens in, which means that if it's going to impact, people of colour, BIPOC people, are they part of that process? The questions that are being asked, the framing, the data collection, are they all intertwined in that, or are they just going to be impacted by it? If that's going to be the case, then what are we doing? If that lens is applied from the start to the growth and progression of that, you're always creating these spaces of what is the right and wrong. you're doing it together.
Yeah.
You're making sure that intersectionality is captured,
Mm.
but you're accountable, you're transparent, there's opportunities to correct and adjust if you need to.
Mm.
So I love the notion that when we are providing these opportunities, like you said, Andy, it's only going to make what we do that much better.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's enhancing to say no.
Otherwise, I think if we're running after, if we ditch who we are to run after dollars, there's no point. Like,
No trust.
Yeah, and I think.
and I know it's not quite as sharp as that.
Mm.
It's more nuanced than that.
Mm.
But I think that's where we have to actually. We always have to be in that place. And he's right. The gambling one, we said this is who we are, and it was potentially costly. But this is who we are.
It has been costly, and others have gone in and taken up those funds. I know that for a fact. Other peak bodies that have a non-profit assignation have taken it up, but we've got to stick with it.
Take a stand.
I think though as well, I wasn't only talking about funding. Like
Yeah.
I think that I'm talking about proactively going after policy that sucks.
Yeah.
And what does that mean?
Definitely.
And how do we build
Yeah.
our muscle and our reputation to do that work?
Definitely.
Rather than responding, we go after
Yeah.
it.
Yeah, definitely do it. Often it shouldn't be us, though. I mean, we should create the space
Yes,
for those impacted.
certainly me.
Totally.
My job is to hold the space. That's right.
So no, totally. That's it. We've got to do that. Otherwise,
Yeah.
what are we here for?
Though I do throw a really good punch.